So we're on to week 26, day 2. And here again, we go through the chronicles and stories of the kings of both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Today, 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 16 through 29, and 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 9. Here we start to look at some bad kings that are found in the southern kingdom of Judah. And we find that they're following the example of the kings from the northern kingdom of Israel. And I have to tell you, that's not a good idea. In fact, in the entire history of the northern kingdom of Israel, none of the kings are considered to be good. All of them are considered to be bad. So they're not the example to follow. They're sort of like the bad kids on the block that we don't want to emulate. Well, these kings of Israel, unfortunately, did follow their example. One of the first, Jehoram, this is Jehoshaphat's son. Now here, Jehoshaphat, good king, but his son did not follow in his father's footsteps. In fact, he does follow in the fact that that treaty that Jehoshaphat and Ahab were going to make, God had rebuked Jehoshaphat for that, and Jehoshaphat had repented. And yet, his son, Jehoram, says, yeah, that's not a bad idea, and he marries Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. Now, marriage was often used to create political alliances between different kingdoms. We've seen that even into some of our more modern times. But when you're talking about Ahab and Jezebel, probably the two worst examples of people who did not follow God. To marry their daughter, probably not the wisest thing that you could have done. Well, it turns out indeed that it wasn't a wise thing to do at all. Now, Jehoram dies, and his son Ahaziah is relatively young when he comes to the throne. He's also greatly influenced by his mother. Now, this would be Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah. And because of her influence, he perpetuates a practice of worshiping other gods besides the one true God. So we find that even though Jehoshaphat had been a godly king, his relationship with Ahab in forming that treaty became costly to successive generations. When we deal with bad, we get bad in return. So something for us to consider. Are we doing right in our day-to-day interactions? Are we following God's will? Are we depending upon God for what we need? Or are we trusting in human strength and human wisdom? Human wisdom might actually be an oxymoron. When we follow God's will, then we are less in danger of creating bad effects, not just for us, but for those who follow after us. Something to think about today.